Hello students, welcome to the 10th standard social science class. Hope you all are reading well at home and completing your homeworks in time. Before starting the class, as usual, I want you to get ready with a pen and a notebook to note down the important points as we are going through this important chapter, the rise of nationalism in Europe. So are you ready, children? So as you could see over here, the name of the lesson is The Rise of Nationalism in Europe. So during the 18th century, what happened we are going to see here? Visualizing the nation. Artists in the 18th and 19th centuries portrayed their nations as if it were a person. Here, they resemble the nation with a person, maybe a lady or a gentleman. Most of the countries represented their nation with a woman. So, nations were represented as female figures, which was called allegory. Clear? So, you have learnt about this in 9th standard. Still, we are going to learn here in 10th too. So, nations were represented as female figures. So, from the examination point of view, this is an important picture. Okay. So, we are going to read in detail about this. So, please pay attention, children. Look at the picture first. So, this is the dream of worldwide democratic and social republics, the pact between nations. This was a print prepared by Frederick Soru in the year 1848. So this was a print prepared by Frederick Soru in the year 1848, and this was called The Dream of Worldwide Democratic and Social Republics, the pact between nations. So in 1848, as we know, Frederick Soru, a French artist, he belonged to France, a French artist, prepared a series of 4 prints. How many prints did he prepare? He prepared 4 prints visualizing his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republics, as he called them. So it was an imaginary drawing. Okay. So the first print, the figure which you are seeing now, the drawing, shows the peoples of Europe and America. So people of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes. You can see the picture clearly. I mean to say that people of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes, marching in a long train and offering homage to the Statue of Liberty as they pass by it. So they are passing by the Statue of Liberty. This white color statue, can you see in the picture? So they are passing through it and they are paying homage, respects to the statue. As you would recall, artists of the time of the French Revolution personified liberty as a female figure. So liberty was portrayed as a female figure. Here you can recognize the torch of enlightenment. She bears in one hand and the charter of rights of man in the other. So this is what the picture depicts. Statue of Liberty is there. On one hand it carries a torch, in the other hand it carries charter of the rights of man. So let us see what is on the ground. You can see small pieces which are lying on the ground. Let us see what are those. On the earth in the foreground of the image lie the shattered remains of the symbols of absolutist institutions. So these are the shattered remains of the symbols of absolutist institutions. In Soru's utopian vision, okay, what is utopian vision? A vision of a society that is so ideal that it is unlikely to actually exist. So utopian, a vision of a society, you can note down, a vision of a society that is so ideal that it is unlikely to actually exist. Okay, so in Soros' utopian vision, the people of the world are grouped as distinct nations who are identified through their flags and national costume. As in India also, we are identified by our costumes or our language and all those things. So here, in this particular image or drawing, Soros was able to identify people of different nations with different kinds of flags and costumes. Leading the procession, important again, way past the Statue of Liberty are the United States and Switzerland, which by this time were already nation states. France, identifiable by the revolutionary tricolor. So France is clearly depicted by the tricolor, which has just reached the statue. She is followed by people of Germany bearing the black, red and gold flag. So first you can see France, then Germany. Interestingly, at the time when Soros created this image, the German people did not yet exist as United Nation. The flag they carry is an expression of liberal hopes in 1848 to unify the numerous German-speaking principalities into a nation-state under a democratic contribution. So first came France, then came Germans, then after them who followed we are going to see. Okay. Then came the people of Austria, then the kingdom of two Sicilies, Lombardy, Poland, England, Ireland, Hungary and Russia. So you have to remember the sequence. France, Germany, clear? Then came Austria, the kingdom of the two Sicilies, Lombardy, Poland, England, Ireland, Hungary and Russia. You have to remember these in the sequence. From the heavens above, so we have, in the beginning we have seen the Statue of Liberty, then we talked about the shattered things which are lying on the ground, then the people who are marching, then now we are going to see something which is above the heaven. You can see some pictures there. Let us see what is that in detail now. So from the heavens above, Christ, saints and angels gaze upon the scene. So they are watching from the heavens. Who all are watching? Christ, saints and angels are watching the scene from above. They have been used by the artist to symbolize fraternity among the nations of the world, brotherhood. Okay, so these are actually depicted. Who? Christ, saints and angels are depicted to symbolize fraternity among the nations of the world. Clear? So this is in detail about the painting prepared by Frederick Soros, the dream of worldwide democratic and social republics, the pact between nations prepared in the year 1848. So during the 19th century, nationalism emerged as a force which brought about sweeping changes in the political and mental world of Europe. The end result of these changes was the emergence of the nation state in place of multinational dynastic empires of Europe. The concept and practices of a modern state in which a centralized power exercised sovereign control over a clearly defined territory had been developed over a long period of time in Europe. But a nation state was one in which the majority of its citizens and not only its rulers came to develop a sense of common identity and shared history or descent. This commonness did not exist from time immemorial. It was forged through struggles, through the actions of leaders and common people. So we are going to look about the diverse processes through which nation states and nationalism came into being in 19th century Europe. I want you to write one definition, children. Absolutist. So what is this? You have to write down, children, jot down. Absolutist. Literally a government or system of rule that has no restraints on the power exercised in history. This term refers to a form of monarchical government that was centralized, militarized and repressive. These are there in your textbook. You can still write down. Utopian. A vision of a society that is so ideal that it is unlikely to actually exist. So, what is plebiscite? A direct vote by which all the people of a region are asked to accept or reject a proposal. So, in this slide, you can see the three definitions: absolutist, utopian, and plebiscite. So, we are going to see about the French Revolution and the idea of a nation now. So, the first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789, which you have learned in the previous class, 9th standard, if you remember. Okay, France, as you would remember, was a full-fledged territorial state in 1789 under the rule of an absolute monarch. Who was he? Try to remember the Bourbon dynasty. Yeah, King Louis. Okay, King Louis XVI. So, the political and constitutional changes that came in the wake of French Revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty from the monarchy to a body of French citizens. The revolution proclaimed that it was the people who would henceforth constitute the nation and shape its destiny. From the very beginning, the French revolutionaries introduced various measures and practices that could create a sense of collective identity among the French people. What are those we are going to see now? So, steps taken by French revolutionaries. What all steps did they take? We are going to see here. Ideas of la patrie and la citoyen. So, what is this we are going to see now? So, la patrie. La patrie means the fatherland. La citoyen means the citizen. These emphasized the notion of a united community enjoying equal rights under a constitution. So, why were these concepts introduced? La patrie and la citoyen? Because it clearly wanted to specify that everybody is going to enjoy equal rights under the constitution. What is the second one? New French flag. A new French flag, the tricolor, was chosen to replace the former royal standard. So, first step was la patrie and la citoyen. Second one was the new French flag, tricolor, remove the colors. Okay. And next, a States General was elected and renamed National Assembly. So, what was this? The States General was elected by the body of active citizens and renamed the National Assembly. New hymns were composed, oaths taken, and martyrs commemorated, all in the name of a nation. Next, a centralized administrative system was put in place and it formulated uniform laws for all citizens within its territory. Internal custom duties and dues were abolished and a uniform system of weights and measures was adopted. Regional dialects were discouraged and French, as it was spoken and written in Paris, became the common language of the nation. So this is about what the steps they took actually. Still something to go here now. When the news of the events in France reached the different cities of Europe, students and other members of educated middle classes began setting up Jacobin clubs. Their activities and campaigns prepared the way for the French armies which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland and much of Italy in 1790s. With the outbreak of revolutionary wars, the French armies began to carry the idea of nationalism abroad. So now came the real hero. Who is he? Napoleon. So Napoleon Bonaparte ruled France from 1799 to 1815. So within the wide swath of territory that came under his control, Napoleon set about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. Through a return to monarchy, Napoleon had no doubt destroyed democracy in France, but in the administrative field, he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. So what all things did he introduce? We are going to see now. So we are going to see a picture over here. You are able to see the picture, children? So the courier of Rhineland loses all that he had on the way home from Leipzig. So Napoleon here is represented as a postman on his way back to France after he lost the Battle of Leipzig in 1813. Each letter dropping out of the bag bears the names of the territories which Napoleon had lost. So we are going to see about the Civil Code of 1804, or which is otherwise called as Napoleonic Code. So this particular code actually did away with all privileges based on birth, established equality before the law, and secured the right to property. This code was exported to the regions under French control. In the Dutch Republic, in Switzerland, in Italy and Germany, Napoleon simplified administrative divisions, abolished the feudal system, and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. In the towns too, guild restrictions were removed. Transport and communication systems were improved. Peasants, artisans, and new businessmen enjoyed a new-founded freedom. Businessmen and small-scale producers of goods in particular began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights and measures, and common national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. So what did the Civil Code of 1804 do? We are going to see now. So it stated equality before the law was established, secured right to property, it simplified administrative measures, it abolished feudal system, it freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues, guild restrictions were removed, transport and communication systems were improved, Napoleon took away political freedom, increased the taxes, imposed censorship, and forced people to join French army. However, in the areas conquered, the reactions of the local population to French rule was mixed. Initially, in many places such as Holland and Switzerland, as well as in certain cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan and Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. But the initial enthusiasm soon turned to hostility as it became clear that the new administrative arrangements did not go hand in hand with political freedom. So initially people were happy, but later on they were not happy with the kind of rules which Napoleon imposed on people. Increased taxation, censorship, forced conscription into the French armies required to conquer the rest of Europe all seemed to outweigh the advantages of administrative changes. So the making of nationalism in Europe. So what we know today as Germany, Italy and Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies and cantons whose rulers had their autonomous territories. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territories of which lived diverse people. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. I mean to say, they always thought that they are different from their other countries. Often, they even spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria-Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and peoples. I repeat again, the Habsburg Empire, we are talking about the Habsburg Empire, which ruled over Austria and Hungary, was a patchwork of different regions and people. It included Alpine regions, the Tyrol, Austria, and the Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia, where the aristocracy was predominantly German-speaking. It also included the Italian-speaking province of Lombardy and Venetia. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the other half spoke a variety of dialects. In Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. Besides these three dominant groups, there also lived within the boundaries of empire a mass of subject peasant peoples, Bohemians and Slovaks of the north, Slovens Slovenes in Carniola, Croats to the south and Romans to the east in Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. The only tie binding these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor. So people had different conceptions and their perceptions towards the king also, the languages also. So only the king was able to bind them together, but they were actually divided. So the aristocracy and the new middle class. Socially and politically, a landed aristocracy was the dominant class on the continent. The members of this class were united by a common way of life that cut across regional divisions. They owned estates in the countryside and also town houses. They spoke French for the purposes of diplomacy and in high society. Their families were often connected by ties of marriage. This powerful aristocracy was, however, numerically a small group. So these are the points of aristocracy and new middle class. The majority of the population was made up of peasantry. To the west, the bulk of the land was formed by tenants and small owners, while in Eastern and Central Europe, the pattern of land holding was characterized by vast estates which were cultivated by serfs. In Western and parts of Central Europe, the growth of industrial production and trade meant the growth of towns and emergence of commercial classes whose existence was based on production for the market. So, the aristocracy and the new middle class, the landowning class, they spoke French, they are connected by ties of marriage. They were numerically small groups, peasantry, majority of population, middle classes were there. New social class emerged with the growth of towns and emergence of commercial classes. Educated class where ideas of nationality gained popularity. What did liberal nationalism stand for is what we are going to discuss now. Ideas of national unity in early 19th century Europe were closely allied to the ideology of liberalism. The term liberalism actually is derived from a Latin word called liber, meaning free. Liberalism, liber means free. For the new middle classes, liberalism stood for freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. Politically, it emphasized the concept of government by consent. Since the French Revolution, liberalism has stood for the end of autocracy and clerical privileges, a constitution and representative government through parliament. 19th century liberals also stressed the inviolability of private property. Yet, equality before the law did not necessarily stand for universal suffrage. What is suffrage here? The right to vote. You will recall that in revolutionary France, which marked the first political experiment in liberal democracy, the right to vote and to get elected was granted exclusively to property owning men. I mean to say, the right to vote was only granted to men who owned property. Men without property and all women were excluded from political rights. I mean to say that men and all women who never owned any kind of property were excluded from political rights. Only for a brief period under the Jacobins did all adult males enjoy suffrage. However, the Napoleonic Code went back to limited suffrage and reduced women to the status of minor, subject to the authority of fathers and husbands. I mean to say, women were not given any kind of value and they were ruled according to the words of the fathers and husbands. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. In the economic sphere, liberalism stood for the freedom of markets and the abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. During the 19th century, this was a strong demand of the emerging middle classes. So if you see the example of German-speaking region first half of 19th century, Napoleon's administrative measures had created out of countless small principalities which are called a confederation of 39 states. So a new conservative regime of 1815, this believed that established institutions of state and society should be preserved with the charges initiated by Napoleon. Here we come across the Treaty of Vienna of 1815. Here what happened in the Treaty of Vienna we are going to see now. Bourbon dynasty was restored to power in France. A series of states were created in the French boundary for preventing French expansion in future. German Confederation was left untouched. Main intentions was to restore the monarchies that had been overthrown by Napoleon. So these are the important points of the Treaty of Vienna. So the revolutionaries, a commitment to oppose monarchical forms that had been established after the Vienna Congress and to fight for liberty and freedom. So we came across Giuseppe Mazzini. He was born in Genoa in 1807. He was a member of the secret society of Carbonari, founded Young Italy in Marseilles and Young Europe in Bern. He believed in the unification of Italy into a republic. The age of revolutions of 1830 and 1848. In July 1830, Bourbon kings of France were overthrown and a constitutional monarchy was established. Belgium broke away from the United Kingdoms of the Netherlands. Greece, which has been a part of Ottoman Empire since the 15th century, struggled for independence. Here what happened? The Treaty of Constantinople of 1832 recognized Greece as an independent nation. Remember this? The Treaty of Constantinople of 1832 recognized Greece as an independent nation. The romantic imagination and national feeling. A cultural movement which sought to develop a particular form of national sentiment, criticized the glorification of reason and science and focused instead on emotions, intuition and mystical feelings. German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder tried to discover culture among people through folk songs, folk poetry and folk dances. Hunger, hardship and popular revolt. In most countries, there were more seekers of jobs and employment. Population from rural areas migrated to the cities to live in overcrowded slums. The rise of food prices or a year of bad harvest led to widespread pauperism in town and country. In 1848, the population of Paris came out on the roads and Louis Philippe was forced to flee and National Assembly proclaimed a republic. In 1845, weavers in Silesia led to revolt against contractors. 1848, the revolution of the liberals. The revolution was led by educated middle classes who combined their demands for constitutionalism with national unification. Frankfurt Parliament. On 18th May 1848, members of political associations elected 831 representatives who took their places in the Frankfurt Parliament, convened in the Church of St. Paul and drafted a constitution for the German nation. It was opposed by the King of Prussia and also lost its social basis as no rights were given to workers and women. It forced the autocratic monarchs to introduce some changes. Serfdom and bonded labor were abolished. Hungarians were granted more autonomy. So these are the things which happened in the Frankfurt Parliament. The making of Germany. Yes, children. So now we are going to talk about the making of Germany. So Germany, Otto von Bismarck was the help of Prussian army and bureaucracy took on the leadership of movement of national unification. 3 wars over 7 years ended in Prussian victory and completed the process of unification. Kaiser William I of Prussia headed the new German Empire. Now, the making of Italy. Italy was divided into 7 states, of which only Sardinia Piedmont was ruled by an Italian princely state. Initially, a unification program was initiated by Giuseppe Mazzini, but it failed. Chief Minister, its minister here, Chief Minister Cavour, led the movement with the help of Giuseppe Garibaldi. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed King of United Italy. The strange case of Britain. So England was established as a nation state. English Parliament seized power from the monopoly. The Act of Union 1707 resulted in the formation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. In 1801, Ireland was forcibly taken by the British after the failed revolution. A new British nation was founded through the propagation of a dominant English culture. So children, with this we come to the end of this particular part of this lesson. Do read at home and complete your homeworks in time. Thank you.